Hello, everyone. My name is Derek DeWinter, and welcome to our listeners who are tuning into the DeWinter Difference, an audio podcast where I spend a bit of time with incredible executives I've known for years, and you get to listen in. I hope our conversations are unique, fun, insightful, make you think a little, and are just long enough to listen while running an errand or two. Our goal is to have a little bit of fun, provide something that you can apply in your own career, life, and relationships. First things first, have you ever heard of a chief perpetrator? Well, today you're going to hear from one, and that is John Lamm, chief perpetrator of 24 Hours of Lemons. And I can already hear the wheels spinning in the audience. What? Huh? 24 Hours of Lemons? Let me pull back the curtain and introduce you to John, who goes by Jay. So, Jay, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So, Jay, talk to us about who you are and what on earth 24 Hours of Lemons is for those who've not heard of it before.
24 Hours of Lemons is beer league for motorsport. Essentially, what that means is unlike baseball and golf and all these other things that people are passionate about, but maybe not expert at. Motorsport has always been, boy, if you can't compete at a certain level, like you can't even get out there. And that just seemed ridiculous to us. So we created this. You go to big racetracks, Sebring, Sonoma, things like that. You spend all weekend endurance racing your race car against other people on the racetrack, but you cannot spend more than $500 on the car, which pretty clearly expresses like, this is not serious.
So it's turned into something quite serious from a business perspective. But do you remember the day and place or moment that 24 Hours of Lemons became real? And there's certainly a part of me that hopes that it was after way too many drinks, a bottle of rum, and someone dared you to do something audacious.
Well,
But
you're not as wrong as you think. There certainly was beer involved. There was years into this, 20 years ago, let's say, every Saturday, a bunch of car guys, friends of mine, and these two mentors of mine, guys that became mentors of mine, Eric Zausner and Martin Swig, we'd all get together for this lunch at a Chinese restaurant and sit around and talk about cars. And I had been throwing this idea out because we'd been doing these $500 car road rallies for years just for fun. The idea being, look, if your car doesn't break down, you don't have a good time. So let's get really cheap, crappy cars and try to drive them on the street. I'd been throwing out this idea like, hey guys, like, why don't we do this thing on a racetrack? Because our cars are not breaking down as much as they should. And let's go to a racetrack and that'll make sure that they break down. And everybody thought that was the dumbest idea. And one day at that lunch, I said, well, what if I called it 24 Hours of Lemons? And everybody thought, well, it's a pun. So sure, why don't you build an entire business on a pun? And there we were.
you were double dog dared at a
Yeah,
Chinese
yeah,
restaurant.
yes, that's exactly right. And I have to say, it was not intended to be a business at all. I had started a bunch of businesses. I was running a business at the time, and this just was going to be a fun weekend for my 12 buddies around the table and me. I had no intention of doing it more than once. It was just going to be a party, and it just kind of spun out of control from there.
That's awesome. No good deed goes unpunished. Look at
Yeah.
you, and all these years later. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of fun. We're talking about something that I absolutely gravitate towards, although I've never been to one nor entered a car. So you can challenge me at
That's
the end
never
of
too
this
late.
to do that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I mean, getting a bunch of people out on a racetrack, finding sites, doing safety checks, the online presence, all that kind of stuff is a really complex operation. Share some of the unique complexities that maybe you didn't think about at that Chinese restaurant when you were double dog there, that over the years you thought like, huh, I didn't see that one coming, or that's a bigger issue than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, yeah, it was not intended to be a business and it has become a business. And as shocking as it is to me and everybody else, through no fault of our own, mine and my teams, if you count motorsport as people sitting in race cars racing against each other on the track, this is the biggest racing series in the world. We have something on the order of 7,000 individuals running through this program every year. It is a very complicated business with a lot of moving parts, but it's important because it's fun and it's supposed to be not scary for people and it's supposed to be safe. And I think it is safe, or it's as safe as it can be. There's a lot of pieces that you really needed to attend to. And fortunately for me, I didn't understand any of that when I started this thing. It was not intended to be a big scaled business. So I came at it with absolutely no preconceptions. And I think in a business that turns out, I was really lucky. It turns out if you go into it without any preconceptions, thinking you know how things work, you're in a much better position to figure them out from first principles, from best practices, from your own observations, and not to be poisoned by what the standard that's already out there in the industry is. So I was really lucky with that, that I didn't know a goddamn thing about putting on a motorsport event or risk management of a motorsport event or any of those things. I had to learn that from the ground up. Challenging things that have surprised me, you spoke to the complexity. The IT background of a business like this is weirdly complicated, and I wouldn't have expected that. The main reason is because the car, in any event, the car is an individual entity. It has to be tracked, and there are certain interactions of other entities with it. The person, the driver, is an entity. The team is an individual entity. That is a group of drivers in one car in one event. The event entry is an individual entity. And all of those entities have to interact in the IT space to get them registered and tracked and paid and refunded and all of those things in an incredibly complicated way. And that's not software. That is not a tool you can go to Oracle or to Salesforce and say, hey, give me that off the shelf. So as much as anything else, we revolve around this very complicated piece of custom proprietary software to manage all of these things. We're running the biggest series in the world in terms of asses and seats with a full-time staff of like 5 people. And, frankly, I'm one of those 5 and I don't work very hard. So it's that was a real challenge to me. And I think philosophically, making a competitive event for fundamentally non-competitive people, or to have a non-competitive, even anti-competitive environment, because that's what makes beer league fun. That that was really challenging, and we struggle with that from day one till now. How do you keep it fun in this context of, motorsport? Any kind of high level sport is about electing an elite, treating the elite special, lionizing the elite. But what we're doing is offering people a place to go where you're rejecting the whole idea of an elite. And so that tension has been really complicated. I think, well, over the years, we've done a pretty good job of balancing all that stuff. But yeah, way more complicated than you think a bunch of idiots in crap cans running around a racetrack would be.
I love that crap cans. So it makes me immediately think of the disdain I would have for the haters out there who would be like, "Oh, you idiots,"
Yeah. Well, there's a
type
lot
of a thing. There's
there's
got to be a ton.
Yeah, there's a ton, but of course, if you're talking about a business, you really want the 99% of the world that has fantasized about a thing, but never had the resources or whatever it was to get there. Traditional motorsport is really, their customers are that 1% who had the rich father, had some, I'm not going to say crazy talent because that's a vanishingly small subset of how people get into it, had the access, had the desire, had the lack of fear to do it. That's a really small subset, and it's great that motorsport exists for them. But for the 99% of the rest of us, I wasn't that person. I'm sure you weren't that person. For the 99% of the rest of us who saw it, fantasized about it, but really didn't feel I can make that mental leap and be involved, that's the market.
That's awesome. By the way, I'm thinking to myself right now, if you're listening to this, this is a more interesting conversation to listen to if you have the website pulled up. And so I'll strongly encourage everybody out there who is listening to this to pull up not just 24-hour of Lemons, but also pull up the
24
24-hour
hours.
Le Mans.
Yeah, 24 hours plural, 24 hours of lemons. And thank you for giving me an entree to spiff the website.
Absolutely. But then I would say pull up 24 hours of Le Mans as well and put them side by side on your 2 big screens that you have. It's really, it's the disparity is fantastic. I love it. I love it. So, on the path of life, there are attributes which help anyone excel, and whether that's personally or professionally, there are different attributes that work on the personal side, and some that work better on the professional side. What are some of the ones that you would say have made you successful professionally, and and do you think they're the same ones that have made you relatively successful personally?
Well, I will say, first of all, because I think it has to be said, with this business, I was incredibly lucky. As I said, I've started other businesses before, and I'm involved in other businesses now. This one has been way more fun, way more compelling, and in a lot of ways, way more successful than anything that I actually put together a 40-page BP and worked out all the variables. So I was incredibly lucky in this particular case. And I've been pretty lucky my whole life. I think it turns out, and I didn't know this growing up, because the house I grew up in, we were journalists, we were media people, my family, and I didn't have any language for this, but I'm kind of good at business. I mean, I'm organized. I kind of get ops at an internal level. I'm pretty good at imagining, well, if A, what's going to happen, B, C, D down the line. My brain's just kind of wired that way. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I think I was suited for this kind of a role. And I was lucky in this business to stumble into it. It's much more complicated. It involves a lot more personal relationships and projecting out what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen out 10 years than other businesses I've been involved in. Just kind of suited to that. Um, I have a weird brain, really. My brain, and I've learned this about myself, it seems to focus much less on what's in front of me than I'm curious about, well, how did that get there in front of me and what's going to happen to it after this? That's just kind of the way that my brain has always worked. And it means I can never remember anything in real time. But I think I have a pretty good, just a natural feel for why am I seeing what I'm seeing now and what's the likely outcome of what I'm seeing. I think I'm just wired that way.
Well, that's pretty good wiring. Well, I mean, you use the word luck, or you reference having quite a bit of luck, not just in this, but over the course of your life. And you also use the word organized in terms of describing yourself. And I've heard the term before, luck favors the prepared.
Yeah.
And so I think that organization gives you more opportunities to be
I much agree.
lucky.
Yeah, I really agree, and I try to stress this with our customers. A lot of our customers, because they have watched racing on TV, they've read about racing, they see it on the internet, they fall into this trap of thinking that racing is about the car. And the car is the least important part of racing. Racing is 85% organization, and it's maybe 10% driving talent, and it's 5% hardware. And people come away thinking it's all about hardware because what they're exposed to out in the world is that tiny little fraction of teams and drivers and entities that have been so successful, they solved the first two problems. They solved the organization problem. They've largely solved the driving problem. What they're left with are these fractional, unimportant differences in the hardware. Our guys show up, they're not organized. They don't even know where their gas can is. They don't know where their lug wrench is. They're off the track for 45 minutes, scratching their head like, where's my power drill? I don't know what's going on. And yet they think, oh, if I had more horsepower, I'd win this thing. And that's just fundamentally wrong. Organization in all things in life, I think, is that's the foundation that, yeah, you put yourself in a position to be lucky, but again, you also have to be lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you can disclose this, but who is the most famous person to have entered a vehicle in one of your races?
Well, actually, we do get a lot of professional and so very successful race drivers who come through, and some of them come once and say, "We want nothing." And that's fine. They're entitled and they're not wrong. And then a handful of them are like, "Wow, this is the most fun thing. I haven't had this much fun since I started." Most of those people do not want their names out there because they're contractually obligated not to do other racing series. Travis Pastrana is one I can mention because we had a sponsorship deal with one of his sponsors, and so he was pretty public. The guy, we've had some Hollywood people come through. The guy that I really had the most fun with was Neil Peart, who died recently, which is sort of tragic. But he was a drummer from Rush. He and I'm not a huge Rush fan, but I'm aware of him. He was one of the most talented drummers of the last century, and the sweetest, most enthusiastic, low key guy would just show up, flew under the radar, would hang out and have a hot dog. We had great conversations. He liked the same kind of cars that I liked. I miss Neil. He was really a great customer.
That's awesome. So, as a CEO of a smaller organization, do you feel like you have to bring a greater love or appreciation for the product or service than, say, the CEO of a larger organization, or is that am I off the mark there?
Well, I never had a real job, so I can't speak to being in a large organization. I don't really know. I think With a smaller organization, we are all of us on the core team, and there's 5 people who are FTEs core team, but then there's a dozen prime contractors who are pretty involved, and then every event you're picking up 60 or 70 humans to run an event. So there's a lot of people, but the core team is definitely small. And I think everybody in a small company like ours understands the business in a much more complete way than people in a larger. Anybody who's on our weekly stand-up calls could step in if I got hit by a bus and could figure out how to run this thing and would do a good job of it. And I think that's great. I mean, that's really satisfying. Um, are we more committed? Are we more passionate? I don't know. I mean, maybe people who show up at Apple are as steeped as we are in their little piece of it. But I think that we all have a much more holistic, I hate the word, but a much more holistic view of, well, what's going on with the business? Where's the business going? What does it need to operate every day? And
Mhm.
that's pretty fun.
Well, speaking of where the business is going, you've got races and rallies and big online presence. Have you looked into anything else? Maybe things that float or
Yeah.
fly?
Well, we've had some forays. So this thing has been going on since 2006. I mean, it's been a real business since about 2009. It became clear in about 2009, like, okay, this is a better business than some of the other things we're doing right now. But so it's been around a really long time. And in all those years, we have looked at a lot of I call them brand extensions. And we've talked about boats, and somebody suggested $50 horses, which I thought was a pretty funny idea. But the truth is, and we've gone down some of those roads and done some extensions, and some of them still exist. We have a street rally program that still exists. We've done international franchising over the years. We have an iRacing thing that we started during COVID that still exists. But for the most part, what I've learned is, we have this great product and we have these really loyal customers because they like the product, they like what we're doing. If you're going to wake up in the morning and pursue something until you have really found every single customer who wants that product, focus on your product. And and
Mm.
and when we have gone after these brand extensions, I realize now in retrospect, because I was too stupid to realize it at the time, what we were doing was trying to work around the fact that we bumped up to the limits of our own in-house marketing. We had exhausted the ways we knew how to reach more customers. And instead of asking the right question, which is, well, okay, we've done what we know. How do we find someone who can do more than we know how to do? That's the right question. So we can sell more of our real product. We would say, oh, well, what about an electric car rally? What about this? What about that? And I mean, I'm mentioning this because you guys in your other hat, you actually helped us solve that problem. I mean, we found a great guy to run a marketing program through you. Thank you. And he's been a wonderful guy and a wonderful addition. And that's the right answer. Eventually you reach every customer and you want another product. But we're not there, and we won't be there for a long time yet. So we are looking at how do you get more people into this program that runs well? We know how to do it. People like it.
Thanks for the plug, you minx. That's great. I appreciate
It's,
that.
it's true. It's true. I have to say, and I haven't talked to you much since that hire. He's been great, and he's really made everybody's life better. So thanks.
And hopefully listening. So that's great.
No,
So
hopefully not, because I don't have to give him another raise.
so I've done a bunch of these podcasts, and typically, just the spoiler alert, I share a little bit about some of the questions that I'm going to ask, and the next question is perhaps the dumbest question I've ever asked on any of these things, based on the conversation that we've had, and it's, if you could have the same lifestyle you have today, doing something different, what would that be and why? And I can't imagine the answer is anything different than what you're doing.
Well well, you'd be surprised, actually. I mean, I listen, I am fully aware of how fortunate I am, and what a great business this is in a lot of ways, and how fun the people that I work with are. I can't imagine somebody in a better position. But your question is a little bit different. Your question is, if it were something different and it's the lifestyle you're living, what would it be? And I thought a lot about this, and weirdly, I think and nobody's going to say this in 2024. Nobody's going to say this because it's a bad word, but private equity. I mean, it's such an interesting business to me. I know a lot of people who are in it, and as much as that is a cursed word right now, and something else will be the bogeyman a year from now. Um, the idea that there are all these really interesting businesses out there, and a lot of them really need the kind of skill set that I think I have. And you could preserve a lot of jobs and you could preserve a lot of happy customers just by being able to touch some of these things and get in. That's really interesting to me. And I didn't even know that that was a possibility out in the world until I was in my, 20s. I just wasn't exposed to that. And I think that's where I would have wound up in a different life.
Interesting. You're right. I would not have expected that. But if I
Yeah.
unpack
Neither
who
would
you
I.
are,
Neither
yeah,
would I.
if I unpack who you are and what you're good at and the things that you've accomplished and being able to wear multiple hats as you obviously have to, it actually makes a little bit of sense. So I'll give you some credit for thinking about that. All right, we get to the fun part of the program here where as much as we've had some conversations about some of the questions that we were going to talk about and you're going to answer, I let you ask me a question and I have no idea what it is. So I'll do my best not to put my foot
Well,
wedged deeply in my mouth, but we'll see what we can do.
I'm gonna give you a choice: professional or personal.
Oh, it's personal.
Personal.
Yeah.
All right. So I've always had this fantasy. I want to buy a Citroen 2CV, preferably a real old one with the small motor. They're all small, but the smallest motor. Top speed is like 55 miles an hour on one of these things. I want to buy one of these on the East Coast and take about 3 weeks. Drive. You can't go on an interstate. You'll get creamed. Driving this thing back to California. You want to come?
Yeah. I don't know that I have my back might give out, my brain might give out, but I've always had a romantic notion of doing something like that. And there was a guy that I worked with years ago who did one of these an insane trek across one of the Akistans. Well, what's the name of that thing? Like it's this
You're
incredible rally.
probably peaking to Paris. There's one that it does what it says on the can. That you start in Peking with these old cars, or Beijing. They call it Peking to Paris because that was the historic name of this rally. And they go through 8 or 9 stands on their way to Europe, and they end up in Paris. And yeah, guys are doing this in 1938 Fords and 1952 MGs. I'll do that. I'll do that instead of the 2CV.
Well, and I think the guy that I know that did this, the point was that when you got to where you finished, you
Yeah.
donated the car to whoever it was that was there. And I think a lot of the
Oh, I
cars
like
ended up
that.
they ended up being like old retrofitted ambulances and
Oh, I like
cars that you could use like civically
that.
within
Yeah.
the township or whatever it might be. And I think by the time you got to that place, I'm not so sure that they were, but
Well,
the intent was very good.
yeah, there's always scrap value. All right, well, you figure out what that one is, and that's vaguely familiar. There's a lot of these kinds of things, and yeah, I've wanted to do that. There's one that runs the perimeter of Africa in old cars. I would do that one. I want to do one of those. If you're in, we'll do it together.
That would be crap. I'm gonna have to talk to I hope my wife is not listening to this one because she may immediately put the kibosh on it. Hey, by the way, just a curiosity, is there any chance you guys get to France and do one of your races
Well,
on the track for the 24 hours of Le Mans is?
it's interesting you asked that question. So about 10 years ago, when we started doing a franchise business and our first franchisee was Australia, that's our first franchise territory. That cooked along fine for a year or two. And then I got this letter from the ACO, which owns the 24 hours of Le Mans. And they said, "Hey, dude, like, what the hell are you doing? You can't do this. Like, we're going to see your ass." And my first reaction, of course, was, "Well, screw them." I'm like, "Ah." And, I have this great IT lawyer Mark Steiner, who immediately talked me off of that high horse. He said, "Dude, they're not wrong. Of course, like you would do the same thing." And I immediately realized, like, well, yeah, no, actually, they're not wrong. I get that. So we wound up working out a deal with them. We are able to operate with our name. I mean, the premise was if they're going to fight us in every country, that kind of IP law is different country to country. And, we'd win some, we'd lose some, but I don't want to live my life like that. That's ridiculous. And the fact is they weren't wrong. They were right to be worried about confusion, particularly in non-English speaking countries where the word lemons doesn't mean anything. So anyway, we work at a deal with them, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, no problem. If we want to work anywhere else, we have to get their sign off. And I think that, sort of implies some sort of working together piece. I always, in the back of my mind, I wanted to get on an airplane and fly to Paris and sit down with those guys and say, okay, what does that really mean? Like, do we really want to try to do this? But as I was saying before, I have more immediate problems. Uh, but I certainly never expected it. And we've had IP matches now with Mattel and with Disney, both of which we won very quickly. Um, which I don't know anybody else who could say that. Um, and I think I realized very quickly, boy, life is too short to be sideways with people about that kind of thing. I mean, you just don't want to be in the middle of that. So I guess that's a long roundabout way of saying I doubt we'll be running France anytime soon, unless I can come up with another pun as good as this one that doesn't make my French friends angry. I don't think
Oh,
we'll be there.
that's hilarious. Well, look, Jay, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you like this. So that
Yeah, I did too.
others can listen in. You are absolutely the chiefest perpetrator I've ever met. And you've got me on the hook for thinking about doing this. I have buddies that would say yes in about a nanosecond. In fact, I should have texted them all before we started this podcast and see if they all said yes by the time we finished. And for those out there who are interested in a racing beer league, I strongly encourage you to take a look at this. It would be a lot of fun.
Well, thanks very much. And I'm going to go shopping for that 2CV now. So
Love it.
I'll meet you in Rhode Island with the car.
Excellent. We'll talk to you soon, Jay.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the DeWinter Difference podcast. If you like this episode, head to DeWinterGroup.com/DeWinter-Difference to catch future episodes and share your thoughts, comments, or suggestions. And make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is produced by the DeWinter Group, the leading recruiting firm in the Bay Area and beyond. We help top companies and people reach their fullest potential through world-class accounting, finance, and technology recruiting services.